But what do you make of the level of dominance that we're seeing? Is this just like a cyclical thing? Is this just happen to be a year where the SEC is really, really good and some of the teams in the ACC and the Big East are maybe down compared to what we would have expected? Or is this something where the money's coming in? It's got football money coming in. You have revenue sharing coming in where they're going to have a bigger slice of pie to divide into basketball. They're going to have more money to be able to spend there. Is this something where, let me phrase like this, can other leagues model what the SEC is doing, or is this just the SEC flexing its financial muscle?
Flexing its financial muscle. They have that ability, and a lot of the cities that these SEC schools are in, that's the only show in town. And there's a different sort of willingness to be an active participant in the roster. I think that's the big thing. And then you throw in football money, and I'm touch and go on that, guys. You know, we look at what North Carolina did, paying $10 million for Bill Belichick. Like, that money could have been used elsewhere. And you guys kind of care about football, but you don't. And here's the thing, like, it kind of comes back to, well, they're like, well, if football good, everybody good. No. The teams that are good are the teams where you're putting your financial resources. And if you have $10 million, why wouldn't you put it in basketball? Mm-hmm. I like, you don't care about football. You never really have. And here we are, like, putting a bunch of money in a 72-year-old dude. Like, I heard his girlfriend got tuition there, but like, outside of that, like, there's not a whole lot of positives out of hiring a 72-year-old human. So I don't know what exactly they're thinking. They did make a bang announcement in a transfer portal by signing a center from Holy Cross. Good for them. They're off to a blazing start. But like, I just don't really understand, you know, why this has been a thing that just catches on. Well, football goods, everybody's good. No, it's not true. Can it buoy you up? Can it buoy you up to mediocrity? Sure. But if you put money in, that's where you're going to have success. That's why the SEC's been good.
Yeah, and Fan, it's really hard just to kind of piggyback on that. It's really hard to look at the money that UNC spent on Bill Belichick and ignore the fact that they couldn't get Cliff Amore over the line, and he decided to go to Alabama, and they couldn't get AJ DeBonsa over the line, which in part was a financial decision by AJ and his father, right? And there's a number of other guys that could have helped fix that North Carolina front line that they were not able to find a way to be able to bring into the
and I've had a lot of pushback with that. I've had a lot of pushback. People texting me being like, it's not that they weren't able, it's just that they didn't open up their resource book. Mm-hmm. So like, both can be true. However, it didn't get done. So, and the funny thing, and sorry, Fant, I'll let you go here in a second. But the funny thing to me is they're like, well, they match the money. That's not how negotiations work. You don't match the money and make it dead even and be like, you pick. No, if you want something, you outbid the other person. That's how it is with freaking houses. That's how it is with like, what are we doing?
That's how it is for Juan Soto.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane to me.
Look, here's the thing. You could also have a lot of money and it doesn't buy you wins. Because if you have bad coaching, or if you don't have culture, I mean, look at Indiana. Look at Kansas State. You know, look, Arkansas is going to spend a lot of money. Where's it going to get them? I mean, let's be real here. So you could spend money and spend it incorrectly. Even teams that don't have a lot of money, that have to spend smartly, they could either hit it or they don't hit it. Yeah. So is the SEC flexing its collective muscle? Yes. Are they ever going to be short on change? Of course not. They're always going to have the money to spend. But the SEC, it's not all just buying players. They have some of the best coaches in this sport
100%.
who have established programs and stayed at those programs. Bruce Pearl has made Auburn a destination job. Whoever ends up taking over for Bruce Pearl is actually going to have a very, very hard job to be the guy who replaces what Bruce Pearl did. And I'm not saying Bruce is going anywhere. He's made that a destination. Nate Oates has made Alabama basketball a destination and has done an absolutely fantastic job. Rick Barnes is a Hall of Famer. He's one of the best coaches in the country. So they have great coaching. And about 6 or 7 years ago, for those who don't know this, we've told this story on the pod before. The SEC brought in a guy by the name of Mike Tranghese, who was a former Big East commissioner and a big-time basketball mind. And they brought in Mike and a consulting group at their summer meetings. And in those meetings, they rolled up their sleeves and they said, how can we stop being a joke of a league? And how can we start being serious? Money talks, but it also came down to coaching and it came down to scheduling. And one big takeaway that I have from the non-conference season is that there are certain programs that just did not schedule well. It's harder to schedule now more than ever because you can't predict the teams you're playing in November and December. You can barely predict your own team, what your own team's going to have in November and December. But what I will say is this, and I think this is something that the Big East needs to look at. The ACC should look at too. If you are nickeling and diming your bye games, right? What are you doing with players then? In other words, Butler, you're playing North Dakota State last week. That's a terrible bye game. Terrible. Yeah. Seton Hall, why are you buying Fordham? You know, these cases, the ACC has them too, but I'm just giving cases that I know of right off the top of my brain. You have got to get serious if you want to be consistent in this sport and avoid the bad losses. Because at this point, if there's so many great teams, guys, and there's so many good teams, if you've taken a bad loss or two, you're not making the tournament, unless you have an incredible conference season. You got to be able to schedule correctly. You have to put together the right amount of quality chances and the right amount of blowout things. UConn has mastered this with their schedule. Look at what they've done the last 3 games. They have erased the Maui crap, and they also scheduled terrible bye game opponents. Now they have the money to play with, where they paid $100,000 to play East Texas A&M. But if you're a school and you're an AD and you want to be serious, if you're trying to make the NCAA tournament, yeah, the SEC has money that other teams do not. But if you guys, do you want to continue to be in a place where you're only going to get 4 or 5 bids, or do you want to be in a place where you can get 6 or 7? And if I'm the ACC and the Big East right now, I'm looking at this and saying it's not good enough. There's certain programs that are not pulling their weight, not in their exact performance on the court. Of course, wins and losses is what it comes down to, but it's the behind the scenes stuff, circumstantially, how you schedule, how you build your roster. Do you have a GM? The sport now demands that you have these things if you want to have success. Either get with the times or get lost.
The GM part is a huge thing with it too, because there are already guys out there right now whose entire job is to just sit there and watch mid-major basketball and watch these games and put on their checklist, hey, this is the guy that we need to go after. This is the guy that we need to go after. This is a guy. I was talking to one guy that's in charge of that. He's the director of recruiting for a high major program. And he was like, yeah, my list is 2,500 players long right now. That's all I do all day is I just watch these guys and try to figure out who is going to be good enough to be able to play with us next year and who can I cross off of that list. So you have to have somebody in that role. You just have to, because everybody else does. And if you're playing from behind, the big thing that I think you see with a lot of these programs, T.O., is there are a lot of situations where you're missing on some of the transfers that are coming in because you don't have enough time to be able to sit there and evaluate. 2 that immediately come to mind for me are Aiden Mahaney at UConn and AJ Storr at Kansas, where they are good players, but they are not the player that those programs needed for the role that they were recruited to play, if that makes sense, right? Like you didn't need a slasher that was an inefficient kind of score around the rim in AJ Storr. You needed someone that can make shots and space the floor and be a bucket getter for you if you were Bill Self, right? For UConn, you needed a backup point guard, or maybe even ideally someone that would compete with Hassan Diar for the starting point guard role, that could guard, that could handle the ball, that could do a bunch of different things. And Aiden Mahaney's fine, but he's not that guy. So being able to evaluate throughout the season, so you're not just having this 1 week where you're trying to pretend like you're watching all of this film in the portal when these guys enter, because it's like this, man. These recruitments are like this, right?
Yeah, and you'll notice some of the teams that are having success in the portal are taking kids from within conference. Like, I think Clemson's a good example of that, taking Jaden Zachary, because they knew what he was about. They knew he was a great defender, and they were familiar with him because he'd played at Boston College the previous 3 years. So it is a difficult spot. I have a feeling I know exactly who you're talking about with the GM with 2,500 names. But that all being said, like, it's a tough gig right now, and it's a very hit or miss situation. If you don't have people looking at it right now, and you're not doing background research about the kind of kid he is, because you have to gauge all that stuff within 2 weeks. And the way it's all set up, I mean, Kansas State shelled out a lot of money, and they don't get along very well. They just got rid of a core, which I don't think he did anything spectacularly wrong. It just didn't mesh well. And as a result, you have a guy who was supposed to be kind of a centerpiece. You don't do your homework, and he ends up not panning out, and it's tough. So that's kind of the hard part about the whole thing. A lot of people have directors of recruiting, and their jobs are a lot harder than it used to be.
Yep.